Juan, a doctor, had recently relocated to a new town for his cousin's wedding and also to settle down. Carlos went to the hospital because his stomach hurt. The moment he saw his attending doctor, he felt annoyed and asked to see a different one. It was Juan who attended to Carlos, and despite knowing each other since kindergarten, they never got along and actually disliked each other. They went their separate ways after high school, relieved they wouldn't have to see each other again. But now fate had brought them together once more. When Carlos requested a different doctor, Juan replied that all the others were occupied and he was the only one available. He gave Carlos the option to leave and schedule an appointment for another day if he didn't want Juan to attend to him. Despite his reluctance, the unbearable pain compelled Carlos to agree to let Juan attend to him. Throughout the examination, they exchanged minimal conversation, focusing solely on Carlos's condition. At the end of the examination, Juan diagnosed Carlos with a developing stomach ulcer and prescribed medications. He also provided dietary recommendations, advising Carlos on what foods to eat and avoid, as well as emphasizing the importance of eating on time. Carlos seemed disinterested and eager to leave without paying much attention. A week later, Carlos's sister, Rachel, who was about to get married, was introducing her fiancé to Carlos. Carlos was her only family since their parents had passed away, and they weren't close to their extended family. Rachel had a 10-month-old baby boy named Martin, and her soon-to-be husband, Raymond. Carlos and Rachel were sitting, waiting for Raymond to arrive, when the doorbell rang. Carlos opened the door to find Juan standing there. Annoyed, he asked, "Are you following me now?" Juan scoffed, replying, "Don't be delusional." Just then, Rachel also arrived at the door and excitedly invited Juan inside. Surprised, Carlos turned to Rachel and exclaimed, "Is he your fiancé? I object to this marriage." Just then, Raymond arrived, and Rachel pointed to him, saying, "That's my fiancé." Carlos turned to Juan and asked, "So what are you doing here?" Rachel quickly intervened, explaining, "He's Raymond's cousin." She then invited both Juan and Raymond to come inside. As they discussed the wedding plans, Carlos kept eyeing Juan annoyedly, but Juan didn't even glance in his direction. Rachel noticed Carlos's demeanor and asked, "Are you both friends?" Carlos promptly replied, "Never." Rachel remembered they were in the same class and inquired why they weren't friends. Both Juan and Carlos remained silent, so Rachel turned to Juan for an answer. Juan replied, "I don't know, maybe you should ask him. He was always the one picking fights." Carlos interjected, saying, "Why are you acting like you never picked fights with me?" Rachel asked Carlos if Juan had ever done something to him for him to hate him. Carlos fell silent, and Juan chuckled, saying, "I'm sure it's because of something silly, that's why he can't say it." Carlos then blurted out, "He stole my girlfriend when we were in middle school. I never liked him before, but that made me hate him even more." Juan responded, "I knew it. I knew you didn't have a reasonable reason. I didn't even date her because I didn't like her, and she kept pestering me like an annoying fly." Carlos retorted, "That's why I hate you even more. How could you break her delicate heart? She liked you, and you treated her like she didn't exist." Juan replied, "You're not serious. What about you? You stole my position as the basketball team captain from me." Carlos laughed and replied, "You weren't even on the team, and you're terrible at basketball. Baby Martin could play better than you." Juan fired back, "You knew I wanted to join the team and be captain. That's why you joined and there were no more positions left." The bickering escalated, and they began arguing loudly until Raymond and Rachel intervened to stop them. However, the tension continued as they silently argued with their eyes. At the end of their meeting, Rachel informed Carlos that Juan would be moving in with him for a while. Shocked, Carlos replied, "Why would he be moving in with me? That will never happen." Rachel explained that Juan had just moved to town and hadn't found a place to live yet, so he'd been staying in a hotel since his arrival. She also mentioned that since Carlos would be her bridesmaid and Juan would be Raymond's best man, living together could help them get along better so that they don't end up fighting at her wedding. Carlos quickly objected, "Wait, why am I your bridesmaid?" Rachel replied, "You know I have no friends to ask, and I don't have a sister. It's just you. Please, can you do this for me?" Carlos flatly refused. "No." Rachel persisted, "Okay, fine, but can you at least let Juan stay with you until he finds his own place? Carlos firmly stated, that's not happening. Rachel reminded him, but remember, it's my house. Carlos argued back, yes, but I live here, so I have a say. Raymond and Rachel continued to plead with him until Carlos reluctantly agreed, warning that he'd kick Juan out if he doesn't live there quietly. On the day Juan moved into Carlos's house, Carlos told him, you should thank your cousin. I'm only allowing you to stay here because of him. Juan nonchalantly replied, it's not like I'm happy living with you anyway. Now, show me where I'll be sleeping. Carlos rolled his eyes and reluctantly showed him his room. Carlos was about to establish some ground rules for their cohabitation, but before he could speak, Juan abruptly shut the door in his face. In the days that followed, their interactions remained minimal. Juan left for work early each morning and headed straight to his room upon returning. The kitchen became the only place where they occasionally crossed paths, bumping into each other. One day, as they crossed paths in the kitchen, Juan grabbed water from the fridge and was about to leave when he turned to Carlos and said, I was going to mind my own business, but as a doctor who attended to you, I can't hold it in anymore. Why do you have more soda than water in your fridge? And why is your cabinet filled with spicy noodles? You know, you're not supposed to be eating these things with a stomach ulcer. That's all I've seen you eating since I moved here. Carlos simply replied, just keep minding your own business. Juan shook his head and left. Juan continued to mind his own business until one midnight, when he heard whimpering coming from the living room. Concerned, he went out to check and found Carlos curled up on the couch, holding his abdomen in pain. Juan guessed what might be wrong with him, but decided to mind his own business, as Carlos had asked. He returned to his room, climbed into bed, and covered his ears. Eventually, he couldn't ignore it any longer and went back to Carlos. He tapped him gently and asked if he had taken his medications. It was then that Carlos remembered he hadn't purchased the prescribed medications from the hospital that day. He told Juan, who sighed heavily in frustration. Are you serious? Juan asked. So you're telling me that you haven't been taking any medications, and on top of that, you keep eating those spicy foods and drinking soda instead of water? Carlos, speaking lowly in pain, responded, this is not the time to be giving me a lecture. What should I do to make this pain go away? Juan reminded him, I thought you wanted me to mind my own business, then headed to the kitchen to prepare something. Juan returned with a glass of green juice and urged Carlos to drink it and try to sleep. Carlos hesitated, asking what it was. Juan explained that it was cabbage juice and assured him it would help with his pain. With a disgusted look, Carlos replied, I'm not drinking that. I hate vegetables. Juan placed the juice on a table beside him and said, drink it or not, that's your business, before leaving for his room. An hour later, he returned to find that Carlos had drunk the juice and fallen asleep. Juan gently covered him with a blanket and returned to his own bed. The next morning, as Juan was leaving for work, he crossed paths with Carlos. He inquired about Carlos's well-being, to which Carlos replied, just because you helped me doesn't mean we are now friends, but if you insist on knowing, I'm okay. Juan stared at him with a blank expression and then left. They reverted to not talking to each other, and even at Rachel and Raymond's wedding, they maintained their distance. Carlos agreed to at least escort Rachel down the aisle, while Juan served as Raymond's best man. After a hectic day at the wedding, they returned home, exhausted, and retired to their respective rooms. The next morning, they both emerged from their rooms upon hearing the cries of a baby. They found baby Martin in a stroller holding a letter. They took the letter, which read, We are traveling to enjoy our honeymoon. Please take care of baby Martin. Everything you need is in his bag. Carlos immediately tried to call Rachel, but her phone was off. Juan also attempted to call Raymond, but his phone was also off. Carlos turned to Juan and asked what they should do now. Juan then said, I just remembered I have a new house to move into, so I'll be leaving today. He turned to leave, but Carlos grabbed him back by the sleeve and said, I would have been happy if you had left before, but you can't leave now. Baby Martin is our responsibility, and we both have to take care of him. Just then, baby Martin started crying again, and Juan suggested, I think he's hungry. However, Carlos disagreed, pointing to his diaper. No, I think it's something else. Carlos asked Juan to change baby Martin's diaper while he made food for him. Juan responded, "No, you change the diaper, and I'll make the food." They argued for a minute before coming to a compromise to toss a coin. Juan won the toss and got to make the food while Carlos changed the diaper. The two men were frustrated throughout the day as they struggled to take care of baby Martin. It was their first time caring for a baby, so they had no idea what they were doing. They had to rely on Google for most things, and Juan even called some of his colleagues who were mothers for advice. By nighttime, they had to decide whose room baby Martin would sleep in. They decided to toss a coin once more, and in the end, baby Martin ended up in Carlos's room. Juan slept peacefully, while Carlos had to keep waking up because baby Martin wouldn't stop crying. Since Juan had to go to work and Carlos worked from home, they decided that Carlos would take care of baby Martin during the day, and Juan would take over when he came back at night and on weekends. However, every night when they tossed a coin to decide who baby Martin would sleep with, Carlos always seemed to lose. As a result, he had many sleepless nights, trying to soothe baby Martin and make him stop crying. Eventually, Carlos grew tired of the sleepless nights, and one night he took baby Martin to Juan's room while he was crying. He expressed his frustration, stating that it wasn't fair that Juan got to sleep peacefully while he couldn't. Carlos decided that they would all sleep in the same room from then on. Juan was speechless, realizing that there was nothing he could say to change Carlos's mind. They placed baby Martin in his crib, and miraculously, he fell asleep almost instantly. Carlos settled onto the bed and quickly drifted off to sleep as well. Throughout the night, baby Martin didn't make a sound, and Carlos slept peacefully for the first time in a while. Carlos expressed his surprise that baby Martin didn't wake up in the middle of the night to cry. To which Juan jokingly replied, "Maybe he doesn't like you. That's why he kept crying when he was with you alone." Carlos retorted, "Then you can keep him to yourself alone." Juan replied, "No, thank you." In the days that followed, they continued to sleep together in one room every night, with baby Martin in his crib and Carlos and Juan sharing the bed. They took baby Martin out on walks together and found moments to relax together whenever they could. Over time, they grew closer and stopped bickering without even realizing it. They became so comfortable around each other that Juan could be in the washroom brushing his teeth while Carlos used the toilet. One day, Carlos tripped on his shoelace, and before he could fall, Juan caught him and pulled him into his arms, preventing the fall. They remained there for a moment, locked in a gaze, unable to look away, as their hearts raced and their hands grew sweaty. Without breaking eye contact, they both placed their hands on each other's beating hearts, and Juan asked, "Are you feeling what I'm feeling?" Carlos nodded and confessed, "This is how I felt when I first met Wendy." Juan asked, "Who is Wendy?" Carlos replied, "My first love, the girl you stole from me." Juan processed this information before asking, "So are you saying we are in love with each other?" They immediately pushed each other away and awkwardly laughed off the moment. Carlos insisted, "That's not possible. We'd sell each other for just candy. There's no way we are in love with each other." Juan agreed, "You're right. Maybe it's because we're always together, and we haven't fought in a while." Carlos suggested, "That's true. Maybe we should stop sleeping together. Baby Martin can stay in your room, since he doesn't cry when he's with you." With that, he hastily retreated to his room. The next morning, they both opened the door at the same time, their hair messy, faces still bearing the traces of sleep and morning breath lingering. The moment they caught sight of each other, they hurriedly retreated back into their respective rooms, quickly washing their faces, brushing their teeth, and fixing their hair. As they stood in front of the door, they couldn't help but wonder, "Why am I doing this?" They opened the door again and greeted each other with a nervous and awkward smile, exchanging a hesitant good morning. With an awkward tension in the air, Carlos asked if baby Martin was still sleeping, and Juan confirmed that he was. Carlos inquired if Juan wasn't going to work, to which Juan responded that it was his day off. As they tried to maneuver past each other, they kept getting in each other's way, further adding to the awkwardness. Just then, they heard baby Martin's cry, prompting them to move aside. Carlos went to pick up the baby to give him a bath, while Juan started preparing breakfast. The tension in the house was palpable, hanging in the air like a heavy cloud. One time, as Juan was heading to work, Carlos unexpectedly told him, "Have a safe trip to work," to which Juan replied, "You too." Immediately after Juan left, he couldn't help but feel embarrassed, muttering to himself, "Why did I say that? You too?" He works from home. Meanwhile, Carlos also felt embarrassed, questioning why he had felt the need to wish Juan a safe trip. Juan returned from work to find Carlos holding baby Martin, both of them fast asleep. A wide smile spread across Juan's face as he reached for his phone to capture the sweet moment. However, he abruptly dropped his smile, lightly slapping himself and questioning why he was smiling. Just then, he noticed a stray strand of hair on Carlos's lips. He leaned in slowly and quietly, intending to brush it away. But Carlos suddenly opened his eyes, startling Juan and causing him to step back, almost losing his balance. Carlos asked when he had arrived home, and Juan replied that he had just gotten in. Carlos nodded and went to put baby Martin in his crib in Juan's room. As Carlos was leaving to go to his own room, Juan grabbed his hand and asked him where he was going. Carlos replied that he was going to bed, and Juan questioned, "Isn't it too early to go to bed?" Carlos asked what they should do instead, and Juan suggested, "Maybe relax and watch something on TV." Carlos agreed, and they both went to sit on the couch, flipping through channels to find something to watch. The awkward tension between them initially dissipated until they encountered kissing scenes on every channel they changed to. They both attempted to act normal, but their body language betrayed them as they fidgeted with their fingers and cleared their throats, sweating. Carlos turned his head to cough, and when he turned back, his face was met with Juan's. Shocked but unmoving, Carlos asked, "What are you doing?" Juan replied, "Do you want to find out if we have really fallen in love with each other?" Carlos asked, "What are you thinking of?" Juan took out his phone and set a timer, then proposed, "If we can kiss for more than 30 seconds, then we are really in love with each other." Carlos asked, "Isn't it about looking into each other's eyes instead of kissing?" Juan countered, "Well, looking into each other's eyes is not enough. I'm going to start the timer." They both took a deep breath, their hearts racing, and slowly leaned in, their eyes shutting as their lips met. Everything around them seemed to freeze as they lost themselves in the moment. 30-second mark came and went, but Juan ignored the timer alarm by turning it off and pushing the phone away without parting his lips from Carlos's. The kiss deepened, growing more urgent as Carlos gently cupped Juan's face in his hands, running his fingers through his hair. Carlos chased Juan's lips as he pulled away. They both stared at each other breathless as Carlos confessed, "What do I do? I think I'm in love with you." Juan admitted, "Me too." They held each other's gaze for a few more seconds before quickly getting up, pretending to be sleepy, and bidding each other good night. A week passed, and they never spoke about their kiss. When Rachel and Raymond returned from their trip to pick up baby Martin, Rachel noticed Juan and Carlos standing next to each other. She smiled and remarked, "I see you both are getting along now." Carlos and Juan responded simultaneously, with Carlos saying, "Not really," and Juan saying, "Yes." Carlos quickly amended, "Sort of like that." Rachel stared at them suspiciously and then asked if there was something going on between them. This time, they both replied in unison, "No." Rachel then quipped, "You don't have to tell me. I'll ask baby Martin, my little spy." Carlos retorted, "He can't even talk." Rachel replied cryptically, "You won't understand." She left with Raymond and baby Martin, leaving Carlos and Juan alone in the house. Carlos turned to Juan and said, "Now that we don't have to take care of baby Martin, you don't have to keep living here anymore." Juan replied, "Are you kicking me out already?" Carlos responded, "I thought you said you had gotten a new place to move into." Juan admitted, "That was a lie I said to escape babysitting. I forgot about looking for a house since I was busy with work and taking care of baby Martin. I guess I'll have to stay here for a bit longer." Carlos said, "You can stay for as long as you want," then quickly retreated to his room. At night, they both tossed in bed, unable to sleep. Until suddenly they got up, opening the door at the same time and meeting each other's eyes. Carlos broke the silence saying, "I can't stop thinking about you. I miss you, even though I just saw you like an hour ago." Juan admitted, "Me too. I kept seeing you everywhere in my room." Then Juan proposed, Should we stop pretending and accept our feelings for each other? Carlos nodded in agreement, affirming, we shouldn't waste any more time to be together. They both hugged tightly, and when they pulled away from the embrace, Juan leaned in, his lips hovering just inches from Carlos's as if seeking permission. Carlos closed the gap between them, initiating a kiss. After the kiss, Juan took Carlos's hand in his own and asked, should we go to your room or mine? Carlos questioned, don't you think it's too early for that? Juan smiled, saying, we are only sleeping, nothing else. Carlos then admitted with a grin, I don't mind if we do something else though. They both chuckled playfully and decided to go to Juan's room, where they cuddled in each other's arms. Juan finally got his own house to move into, but Carlos followed him and moved in with him. They still find themselves bickering over silly things from time to time. However, their arguments were always followed by moments of affection and intimacy, as they couldn't seem to get enough of each other.